The Spanish Empire didn't just rule half the world, it thought the Pacific Ocean was its private lake. Welcome back everyone to Hidden History Stories. In today's episode, we're diving into the impossible voyage of Thomas Cavendish, a 26-year-old English adventurer who sold everything he owned, set sail with just 3 ships, and pulled off one of the boldest heists in history by robbing Spain's empire on the high seas. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and share it with anyone who loves exploring the past. Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, let's begin. Picture this. A 26-year-old English gentleman sells everything he owns, his family's ancestral estates, his manor house, even his father's prized horses, just to buy 3 small ships. His plan? To sail around the entire world and single-handedly challenge the most powerful empire on Earth. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Thomas Cavendish, and what he accomplished would make Hollywood directors weep with envy. It's July 1586, and Thomas Cavendish is standing on the deck of his flagship, the Times Desire *, watching the English coastline disappear behind him. He's just committed what most people would call financial suicide. Cavendish had studied every scrap of intelligence about Francis Drake's secret circumnavigation 6 years earlier. He knew something that terrified Spanish colonial officials. Their vast Pacific empire was practically defenseless. Spanish treasure ships crossed those waters following predictable routes, loaded with more silver than most European kingdoms saw in a decade. But here's the kicker. Cavendish was doing this completely on his own. No royal backing, no government support. Just a young man's burning ambition and 3 tiny ships against an empire that controlled half the known world. His crew thought he was insane. And honestly, they might have been right. By December, Cavendish's little fleet had reached the bottom of South America, where they stumbled upon something that would chill your blood. Remember, Spain had tried to fortify the Strait of Magellan, that narrow passage between the Atlantic and Pacific, by establishing a colony there. What Cavendish found was a nightmare. Port Famine, they called it. And brother, that name was earned. 400 Spanish colonists had been dumped there in 1582 to guard against English pirates. When Cavendish arrived, he found 15 survivors. 15? Huddled among the bones of their dead companions. Picture this scene. Tomé Hernandez, a Spanish carpenter, breaks down sobbing. Tomé Hernandez tells Cavendish how they ate their leather shoes, their belts, even tree bark to survive. His wife and children had starved to death the previous winter. The mighty Spanish Empire had simply forgotten about them. Cavendish took several survivors aboard as interpreters. The irony was delicious. Spanish expertise would now guide English pirates. But first, they had to survive the passage itself. Now, here's where it gets absolutely terrifying. The Strait of Magellan isn't just a waterway, it's nature's own death trap. Imagine winds so violent they can flip a ship like a toy, waves tall as cathedrals, and rocks sharp enough to slice through oak holes like paper. For 17 days, Cavendish's ships battled through this liquid hell. His navigators worked around the clock, their hands bleeding from rope burns, their eyes burning from salt spray. One wrong turn meant death for everyone aboard. The Times Hugh Gallant *, his smallest ship, nearly foundered when a massive wave punched a hole in her side. Only desperate pumping and emergency repairs kept her afloat. Cavendish himself took the helm during the worst storms, his knuckles white as he fought to keep his dream alive. But they made it through. And what waited on the other side would make Cavendish rich beyond imagination. February 1587, Cavendish emerges into the Pacific. Cavendish immediately begins what can only be described as a systematic dismantling of Spanish colonial power. His first target? The port of Arica in modern-day Chile. Now, Arica wasn't just any port, it was where Bolivian silver accumulated before crossing the Pacific. We're talking about treasure that would be worth hundreds of millions today. But it was heavily fortified, bristling with cannons and packed with Spanish marines. Here's where Cavendish proved his genius. Instead of a frontal assault, he used misdirection. The Times desired times kept Spanish gunners busy with steady bombardment while his fastest ship, the Times content asterisk, slipped into the harbor under cover of morning mist. Spanish cannons were thundering at empty ocean while English marines were already storming ashore behind them. The raid succeeded brilliantly. In 3 hours, Cavendish controlled the waterfront and was systematically looting Spanish warehouses. But he discovered something even more valuable than silver: detailed records of Spanish colonial administration. These records revealed exactly how vulnerable the empire really was. Word spread up the coast like wildfire. English pirates were in the Pacific. For months, Cavendish played cat and mouse with Spanish colonial forces. His ships would appear off remote ports like ghosts, seize whatever treasure they could find, then vanish before Spanish reinforcements arrived. Colonial governors were tearing their hair out trying to predict where he'd strike next. But Cavendish had his eye on the ultimate prize, the Manila galleon. Picture the largest, richest ships of the age. These massive treasure vessels carried Asian goods from the Philippines to Mexico, then returned loaded with American silver. Each galleon was worth more than most European nations' annual budgets, and Cavendish knew exactly where to find one. The 14th of November 1587, off the coast of Baja California. The Times Santa Ana asterisk, over 600 tons of floating treasury, wallowed through heavy seas, her holds packed with Chinese silks, porcelain, spices, and precious gems worth over 400,000 pesos. Captain Tomás de Alzola commanded this fortune, completely unaware that English pirates were lurking in waters Spain considered absolutely secure. Now, here's the thing. The Times Santa Ana Times mounted more cannons than Cavendish's entire squadron combined. This wasn't going to be easy, but Cavendish had positioned his ships perfectly. He approached from the galleon's blind spot while she struggled against contrary winds. When the Times Desire Times suddenly appeared alongside flying English colors, Spanish gunners scrambled desperately to their weapons, but they were too late. English cannons raked the galleon's deck with devastating effect. Boarding parties swarmed over her rails, cutlasses flashing. The battle was brutal but brief. Captain Alzola, bleeding from multiple wounds, finally surrendered when English marines threatened to blow up his ship's magazine. Cavendish had just captured the richest prize ever taken by an English privateer. His men were whooping and cheering as they hauled Chinese silks and chests of silver aboard. But the celebration was premature. The real challenge was just beginning. With his ships now groaning under the weight of Spanish treasure, Cavendish faced a terrifying choice. Every Spanish warship in the Pacific was hunting him. The familiar Atlantic routes home bristled with enemy patrols seeking revenge. So what did this audacious young man do? He decided to continue westward and complete a full circumnavigation of the globe. Let that sink in for a moment. Most sailors of this era never ventured beyond sight of familiar coastlines. Cavendish was about to navigate completely uncharted waters with ships so loaded with treasure they could barely stay afloat. His arrival in Philippine waters sent shockwaves through Spanish colonial society. Manila, the administrative center of Spain's Asian empire, had never faced attack from European rivals. Governor Santiago de Vera frantically organized defenses while dispatching urgent appeals for reinforcements that would take months to arrive. But Cavendish was too smart for direct confrontation. Instead, he targeted the network of smaller settlements that sustained Spanish power throughout the archipelago. Each raid yielded more treasure while demonstrating that English naval power could reach Spanish interests anywhere in the world. The psychological impact was enormous. Spanish colonists, previously secure in their isolation, suddenly realized they were vulnerable. Reports of English attacks spread throughout Asia, encouraging Dutch and Portuguese rivals while undermining Spanish prestige. Meanwhile, far out at sea, Cavendish was threading his treasure-laden ships through dangerous passages between Indonesian islands. Portuguese and Dutch trading posts competed fiercely for control of the spice trade, and the sudden appearance of English warships complicated an already volatile situation. At Java, Cavendish proved he was as skilled a diplomat as he was a pirate. The Sultan of Bantam, experienced in playing European competitors against each other, recognized English potential. These diplomatic contacts proved crucial when Portuguese warships from Goa attempted to intercept the English squadron. Captain Francisco de Lima commanded 4 well-armed galleons with explicit orders to prevent English treasure from reaching Europe. What followed was a running battle that demonstrated how colonial rivalries had become genuinely global conflicts. Portuguese cannons thundered across tropical waters while local Javanese war prows darted between the European vessels, actively assisting the English escape. But the worst was still to come. By May 1588, Cavendish's expedition had been at sea for nearly 2 years. Scurvy and tropical diseases had devastated his crews. The Times Hugh Gallant Times had been abandoned in Philippine waters, too damaged to continue. His remaining ships leaked constantly, their rigging stretched beyond safe limits. And now they faced the Cape of Good Hope, the Cape of Storms, where Portuguese naval patrols and treacherous weather combined to create a maritime graveyard. Picture mountainous waves generated by the collision of Atlantic and Indian Ocean currents, battering ships for days while gale-force winds shredded canvas and snapped vital rigging. The Times Desire Asterisk, loaded with treasure, nearly foundered several times as tons of seawater crashed over her rails. Portuguese squadrons from Mozambique and Angola were converging. Portuguese squadrons were determined to prevent English treasure from reaching European markets. Cavendish was literally sailing through enemy waters in ships that might sink at any moment. His navigation during this crisis was nothing short of miraculous. Using captured Spanish and Portuguese charts supplemented by his own observations, he guided his battered squadron through. The 9th of September 1588. English lookouts scanning the Plymouth horizon spotted familiar sails approaching from the southwest. Word spread like wildfire through the port. Thomas Cavendish had returned from his impossible voyage, his ships laden with Spanish treasure. The timing couldn't have been more dramatic, just weeks after defeating the Spanish Armada. Queen Elizabeth herself received Cavendish at court, where the young captain presented her with Chinese silks, precious gems, and detailed intelligence about Spanish colonial vulnerabilities. The treasure from his raids helped finance England's continued resistance against Spanish imperial ambitions. But here's what really mattered. Cavendish had shattered Spanish invincibility. His small squadron had accomplished what most people thought impossible, a successful challenge to Spanish power in their own private ocean. Cavendish's crews found themselves celebrated as heroes throughout England. They had achieved only the 3rd successful circumnavigation in history with minimal royal support and against overwhelming odds. The captured Spanish documents proved as valuable as the treasure itself. English intelligence analysts studied colonial administration records, shipping schedules, and military dispositions that revealed systematic weaknesses in Spain's overstretched empire. This intelligence would guide future English expeditions for decades. Within 10 years, English expeditions would establish trading posts in India, challenge Dutch control in Indonesian waters, and begin systematic colonization of North America. The age of Spanish and Portuguese colonial dominance was ending. Cavendish himself attempted a second circumnavigation in 1591, but this expedition ended in disaster when he died of fever. He died off the coast of Brazil at just 31 years old, but his legacy lived on in the navigational knowledge, diplomatic contacts, and strategic intelligence his first voyage had provided. The young gentleman from Suffolk who risked everything on an impossible dream had opened new chapters in global commerce and European expansion. Think about it. A 26-year-old with 3 small ships had challenged the most powerful empire in the world and won. In an age when most people never traveled beyond their home villages, Thomas Cavendish sailed around the entire planet and came home rich. Now that's what I call living dangerously. That was the end of the story of Thomas Cavendish, the 6-year-old adventurer who risked everything and robbed the Spanish Empire on the high seas. If you found this story fascinating, remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss more hidden history stories. And let me know in the comments, what is your favorite historical era?